All right.
Check, check.
Check, check. You hear me?
Mm-hmm.
All right. 3, 2, 1. Hello, everyone. My name is Josh. I'm starting a podcast called Josh and Friends. The podcast is going to be about social work and all that goes in around it. So in social service work, there's lots of different work that we do. We work with individuals with intellectual disabilities, physical disabilities. I also work with people who are older, and I work as a PSW also. So what I decided to do with this podcast is I'm going to be bringing different topics that involve everything in terms of anything to do with intellectual disabilities. And along with it, I'm going to be telling some personal stories of triumphs and failures that I had. And I'm going to be talking about sexuality and how it works with people with intellectual disabilities and what their knowledge is and what they don't know and what they're being taught. And I'll have a special guest speaker with that named Amanda Abrega. I will also have another edition coming with a mother who has had 2 children. One of them unfortunately passed away from something called Dravet syndrome, and talk about the things that have gone on in her life over the last 30 years with funding problems, issues in terms of dealing with doctors, issues with the police, anything that you could think of, and all the hardships that she's had to deal with in the last 30 years, including losing her own daughter and not having too many friends to go along with it. The other thing that I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get a Toronto police officer or any police officer to come in and talk about mental health and dealing with people with intellectual disabilities. And I'm trying to get them to talk about how far the police service has come from 30 years ago, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, up to 5 years ago, when I think, if I remember at that time, there was a big training that was going on because of an incident that happened on a TTC streetcar. The other topic that I'm planning on doing is I have somebody who teaches fitness for people with disabilities through an organization. He teaches different stretches, different movements that they can do. And he is also his own fitness trainer. I'd just like to introduce my producer, Curtis, who I have brought in to assist me with all this because I'm technologically not the best. Curtis, you have any questions?
I do, yeah. Well, hello, I'm Curtis. I'm the producer. I'm very happy to be here. Josh approached me with this project through a mutual friend very quickly. Well, not mutual. I guess they met on Kijiji. But
where everyone meets people. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. But no, it's been awesome. It was kind of a sporadic project, but I really hear Josh on this, and clearly his passion for this work. It's his field, but it's something I like to think I know a lot in, but through kind of doing some mild research, I realized that I don't. And I think it's something that everyone can understand a little better for the sake of everyone. But I guess my first question, Josh, is what's something you wish that people knew or something that was more normalized about social work or disabilities in general?
I kind of wish that people had the understanding that we don't do this for the money. Social workers do this for not minimum pay. There are some organizations that are kind of not paying the best, but usually it's in the $18 to $22 an hour range. And if you calculate that with a full-time job, it's not that much. So a lot of people, we do it for the passion of loving to help people. And I think I know a lot of people that I've met over the years that understand and think that we're doing a wonderful job. And then when I tell them how much we're getting paid to do that job, their mouths dropped. They had no clue, that we survive on 2 jobs. We survive on a full-time job that makes us between $35,000 to $40,000 gross. And then you take away with all the taxes, I think that's like $1. And we do it for the love of it. This year has been particularly hard because of COVID. So a lot of people have only been able to work one job because of what the government implemented. So those people who would be working, 40, 50 hours in two different places ended up working 60 hours in one place per week, 12-hour shifts, sometimes 3 days in a row, which is very hard. We go through a lot of our own stress, a lot of our own mental health anguish that we have on our own. And we have to have that work home balance, which is very difficult when you are dealing with people with disabilities and their behavioral tendencies, and then having to come home and wind down from being with your family. So it's kind of, not a lot of people know that or understand that, from what my perspective is.
Takes a lot out of you when you're caring about the people that you're working with.
Yes, usually what I do, and I have done over the years, is I'll come home after a shift, no matter how short or long it is. And I'm lucky to have an extra room in my house. And I say hello to my family, and I'll watch something on Netflix and unwind for a half an hour with no disturbances at all. I'm not someone who likes to drink alcohol. I'm not someone who likes to smoke. I'm not someone who likes to get cannabis. I just need to just relax and just get my heart rate going down. Because even after driving home, driving in the city of Toronto and all the outskirts, your heart rate's still going up with all the bad drivers. So I take that extra half an hour. That's what I do.
I was looking up on the Passport program, of course, and there's a bunch of other disability funding available in Canada. But I also know Canada has some limited health coverage as well. For those that need support, those that need medication for their illness, is it usually covered, or do they have to look into a program to help them cover prescriptions that they may need?
When they're under the age of 18, the understanding I have is that their family members have to cover any kind of medications that they're on. They could have insurance through their guardians or parents' workplace that does it. When they're over the age of 18, they're eligible for what's called Ontario Disability Supports, and ODSP, which is the acronym, covers it. It covers it to a certain dollar amount and to a certain percentage. And like a lot of government funding, sometimes they don't cover all of it. Sometimes if you need we have very sensitive stomachs, a lot of people. So some people can handle the generic and not the name brand. And sometimes ODSP will only cover the name brand or just the generic. So it can be very difficult. But when they're younger, generally the money comes out of the pockets. There's no real funding for the medications in that aspect. I mean, unless they have unless their families are don't have a lot of money, so maybe there might be some kind of coverage that they can ask for, but I certainly have not heard about that.
What would you say is the biggest takeaway or life lesson learned from working in your field and being a part of the community?
I think the biggest life lesson in 23 years of doing this is preaching patience. What you might think can be accomplished easily takes the individuals that I have supported and will support and are supporting longer to be able to accomplish. And that you have to have patience. If you don't have patience, you don't have empathy, you're in the wrong field, because it's going to frustrate you to a big degree. And education is huge. When you do your education, having your placements and getting a lot out of your placements really help. There are a lot of people who do come here from other countries, and they get jobs in this field without any real education about it, and it tests on their patience, and it becomes very difficult. And if you don't have the patience for it, you yourself could get yourself in legal trouble, because if you do the wrong thing and it's noticed, then it becomes a lot more than you could ever think that you can handle in terms of the legalities. You can be charged for any sort of abuse, you can be investigated, and it can go on your record and can cause you a lot of problems in the end.
What would you say people with disabilities, people you work with, what do they appreciate most?
They appreciate the fact that someone is giving them the attention. And I have a wonderful story about that. So I was working in a group home. The population was over 50. When I started with this organization, I felt, close to the individuals and had a very good relationship. One of the individuals was a woman who was in her 60s. She had cerebral palsy. She was in a wheelchair and she couldn't talk words. She could express herself through her voice and the use of her hands. So I have a 10-year-old daughter, and when she was younger, she used to come with me sometimes to work. And just when she had days off and I took a day off to take care of her, and I brought her to my day program that I worked at with the older adults. And this woman got very attached to her. She smiled. She loved when my daughter came, absolutely loved it. My daughter used to touch her hand and she loved it. And anything she would say, she just laughed. So one of my favorite stories is as this woman was in the final year of her living, she was pretty sick. She got a cold, she got pneumonia. She was bedbound as opposed to being in a wheelchair. And my daughter wanted to come to read to her. So my daughter came and sat on a stool and read a book to her. And she loved it. Absolutely loved it. Absolutely loved it. And I still have pictures in my phone of her smiling and everything. But the funniest part of it all is when I would go to work and we would talk, she used her hand movements. So she would use her finger going back and forth. So she would look at me and smile, and she would just say and use her finger. And I'm like, you want to know how I'm doing? And she would shake her head no. And then she'd move her finger side to side like the next person. And I'd be like, oh, you want to know how my wife is doing? She'd say no. And then she would go to the next person, and she said, so my daughter's name is Paige. She said, you want to know how Paige is doing? And she would say yes. And that's all she cared about. She didn't care about me. She didn't care about my wife. She cared and just wanted to know how my daughter was doing. So they had a very, very good relationship. And that was really, really rewarding. Because I think that when you have a young child and you show children the kind of work that you do and they develop hopefully some empathy, it actually makes them a better person overall. And I think that's probably the most rewarding thing that I've done in all the years that I've worked, was seeing that relationship between me and this woman turn into a relationship where she was happy to see me, but she'd rather see my daughter. I think that was probably the most rewarding thing I've ever seen. So, I mean, with this podcast, what I'm trying to do is hopefully people who don't understand anything about social work and what social service workers do, and having people who work in the industry listen to it and hear stories that maybe they'd like to talk about, or maybe they haven't talked about, and topics that they don't know too much about that affect the community and that just brings knowledge to everybody. With this podcast, I am putting up an email address. So if anybody wants to put up questions, it's Josh and Friends 1. So Josh and Friends 1 at gmail.com. At some point in the next day or so, I'll have a social media input of Instagram, Twitter, no TikTok though, Facebook. And hopefully we can get some listeners to listen to this and ask questions. And if they send emails, I'm happy to answer questions after I do the topic without a problem in the world. Hopefully I can make this as successful as possible. I hope everyone who's listening understands that we're doing this. We're not doing this for any money. We're not looking for sponsorships. I created this because I wanted to give back and do something from my heart, and and share my experiences and other people's experiences, which I'm sure some people would have already gone through some of this stuff. So hopefully this will do well, I hope. And people will listen, and when it's up, they'll share it with other people, and we'll get a good population of listeners. Thank you, everybody, for listening. I really appreciate your support, and I will see you on the next episode of Josh and Friends.